Welcome everyone here to another workshop for the test camp, and thanks again to our host back there. Thank you very much. This is the FTCE Professional Education Test. Let's discuss how learning and practicing test skills will empower your test confidence. Now, those of you joining us live online, you're welcome to contribute your comments anytime, and we're going to include as many as possible in the discussions. If you're joining us on demand, likely through the Test Camp YouTube channel, of course you can pause or restart or replay that video anytime. Now, this workshop is the first in the three-part series. In this first workshop, we're going to discuss the entire professional education test, which is based on 8 competencies. And you know the name of those here in Florida, that we call them sometimes the FEEPs. The second workshop is titled PED Major FEEPs. Now, that's going to be more of an in-depth discussion later this afternoon about the first 4 competencies. Those are related mostly to teaching and learning. We call these the major FEEPs because a major portion of the test is based on these competencies, right? About 2/3, 65 or so questions out of the 100. The third workshop we're also going to do later today, that includes discussions about the last 4 competencies. And they're called the minor FEEPs, obviously, because there's less of those. Those are more about the knowledge required of teaching professionals and are geared especially towards Florida. Okay, any questions about the series before we get started today? Going to be quite a long afternoon. Yes, back there, I'll repeat this for anybody who's watching their video. Thank you. About the time of this, so you can plan out your afternoon. Most of the workshops here are generally 20 to 30 minutes or so. This one will likely be a little bit longer, probably in the 40-45 minute range, I would say, because this is an overview of the entire test. The other 2 are more specific, and they teach to the competencies. We'll use a lot of sample questions in those also. All right, thanks for that. All right, here at the test camp, we provide training sites for teacher certification tests across the country, almost every state. Florida has been partnered with this company over here that you see that brands the tests over here on the left side up here. Yeah, and so you recognize these, right? You've taken the general knowledge test. There's over 40 subject area exams. And today we're here to talk about the professional education test. In the other states, you can see they're named, they're branded differently. Every state, though, however, is different. And this is the way they are listed because generally that's the order that they have to be taken in. But again, every state is different. Some states require only 1 test. Other states require 4 or maybe even 5. So here in Florida, it's these main 3. Now you might find this interesting too, that the Florida professional education tests applies to all grade levels, K through 12. Learning and teaching in some of those other states only to certain grade levels. All right, so again, feel free to ask questions. I'll repeat those for those who are listening who have come to us on demand. They're watching that video. And of course, come up and see me here at the end of the workshop too. We'll have a break before we start the major FEEPs. All right, so you likely know by now that around here the motto is prepare, practice, and perform. So if you complete the training for this test, you're guaranteed first attempt success. All those have gone before you, they'll vouch for that too. And that's because taking a test is a performance. And a performance requires more than just knowledge. A quality performance also requires skills. Think about that. It takes knowledge, but it also takes skills. And in this case, test skills. That's where you get the confidence that comes from learning and practicing. In this first step of the training, you'll prepare by gaining knowledge about the test through the workshops. You also gain knowledge about yourself through the activities, how well you know the content, and how well you know your test skills over there at the training site. Through the activities, you then practice your test skills and like how to identify the types of questions by their competency. And that's something we're going to do here today, particularly in the next 2 workshops. So you'll learn in this workshop why that's very important on all tests, but especially the professional ed, which is more subjective. Finally, the ability to perform your best will not be a concern, and that's because you'll have earned the confidence during your test skills training. So we start to prepare by studying the test format and content, and this is called the blueprint. Okay, and those of you who participate in the other workshops, well, you know the blueprint, and that pretty much lets you know exactly what's on the test, gives you a full understanding. It tells you not only what's on the test, but tells you the rules. And since this is a performance, you're going to want to know the rules. It's also a good first step to creating what we call my study plan. This is a schedule that includes reviewing and studying the test content. Now this plan can also guide you through the test skills training, and we'll talk about that more in the other workshops. Now this table provides an overview of the 3 question formats you can expect to encounter on the professional education test. Some are formatted as a direct question, and you're familiar with these. Here's an example. Nothing here that's new. But I got a question. Let's see how many honest people we have here. Even you back there. Yep. Did you start up here? How many honest folks? Let's see by hand. How many people actually start up here? Thank you for being so honest. How many start down here? Yeah, well, one of the test skills you'll be practicing during your training is scanning the answer set before reading the STEM. And this provides a preview to the question and to the competency on which the question is constructed. All right, the second question format is sentence completion. Simply, you know this one, simply fill in the blank. All right, the blank is generally there at the end of the sentence, like in this example. Start at the bottom. There you go in the answer set. A third format you might see on these multiple choice questions is a scenario. These are kind of the one generally you want to maybe mark and save if they take up too much reading. But again, if you start down there at the bottom, you'd have to read through each one of those. That takes a little bit more time. All right, so let's try that. Choose their teammates, work together, pick a project, choose a problem. Now we go up to the STEM. You look for key words, key terms. All right, so this is about what the teacher was doing. So that's how that works. Okay, so you'll learn how to mark and save those. Let's go ahead and take a brief look at, we've looked at the formats. So let's go ahead and look at the test items. Now this is new, so be careful of listening to anybody in a webinar or particularly if you find an old study guide. It used to be 120 questions. It's now 100, but you may have more or less on that. They might be trying out questions on you for reliability and validity. So, but 100 is how many will be scored. And like we said just a moment ago, most are scored on what we call the first four competencies, and then the second 4 competencies for the balance. And that's our other 2 workshops today. So let's take time. Introduce yourself to each other. This is a workshop. We want to help each other out. So bring up any questions you might have so far about anything you've heard about the test or you want to ask us before we go on any farther. We'll come back as a group and compare your ideas. Hey, welcome again to those of you joining us today live online. Share your thoughts and we'll include them in the discussion. And if you're joining us on demand, this might be a good time to pause the recording and list some of your thoughts and questions about this test. If we don't address your question here today during the workshop, just come by the camp office on the website, leave a written message or give us a call. We'll get back to you. All right, so we'll be back here when you restart the video. All right, thank you. We've got a question right over here. Everybody's up here? Oh yes, go right ahead. I'll repeat it for those watching the video. Yes, that is a good question. The questions are mixed on this test. I don't want to mislead you here. There's no separate subtest for each of the competencies. You passed the general knowledge test, right? Okay, so remember how there were 4 separate subtests: English language skills, mathematics, reading, and essay. That's not the case for the professional education test, right? They're all mixed together. Another one over here. How much time do you get? Oh, we were just getting to that, and I think it's the next slide, actually. So there you go, right. 150 minutes. So when the number of questions was reduced, the time allotted remained the same. So there you go, 1.5 minutes per question. Okay, and why is the time, knowing the time is important? Right, so knowing the time, well, what we say is it puts you on a pace for success. It slows you down. Most mistakes are made when people try to go through too quickly, or they get stumped. You know, they get stopped somewhere. They lose their momentum. But you'll train for that over at the training center. We do what's called decide is the activity. You mark and save questions, and probably you're not even going to answer not even half the questions the first time through. Yeah, that's one of the testing skills you'll practice during the training. All right, so there's over 1 minute allotted per question, so there's just really no sense in losing your momentum. Okay, does anybody know the percent to pass? We might as well get that out of the way before we look any farther. 71 is correct. So during the training here at the test camp, the percent to pass is, and you can actually earn a professional certificate, it's 80%. And that's another reason why everyone who earns their certificate here passes their test on the first attempt, because if you can pass us with an 80, you certainly can find 71 correct answers. All right, so how we start is by identifying the types of questions. And again, we don't mean the format, we just talked about that. All 100 multiple choice questions are multiple choice. We identify the questions by the competencies that they're built on, the FEEPs. All right, if you know the FEEPs, you have a better chance to choose the correct answer. You'll also learn which competency area you might need to review or study. So a question often asked is, well, who decides what's the correct answer? Who decides who's competent? And that's really important. So if you're thinking that, that's a good question, especially for this test. Some people say it's the experts. So who in the world are these experts? Well, these are test writers that are invited by the test writing company. Professional teachers, teacher educators are all recruited by the testing company to construct test items. They are generally subject area experts or curriculum experts, and their task is to construct questions that are valid and reliable. If you're not familiar with those terms, get familiar with them. Valid and reliable. These test companies do a terrific job creating these tests, but more importantly to you, the questions on these tests are somewhat subjective. They reflect what's out there in the world today, what we call current educational culture. So for the next few minutes, what we're going to do here today at this workshop is explore what this even means before you go to the other workshops and maybe dive in a little deeper with some sample questions. All right, you may not always agree with the correct answer, but here we go. The first competency then is described in the test information guide up here, and we just simply call this planning. And according to the test writers, then what is the best approach for planning a lesson? I'll give you a pairing here. So you get choice A is something that's project-based, or B, design thinking. So here's a brief description of each one of these. Project-based lessons are generated from an established prescribed curriculum. So even if the students are working alone or with each other, the teacher's role is to introduce the concept, ask questions, lead the students, they work together, they come up with the correct answer. Okay, B, that design thinking plan, the questions comes mostly from the students. You might think bottom up. There's no real predetermined conclusions. The teacher's role is to facilitate and encourage critical thinking. So the pathways are very different and broad. There may not be some specific correct answer. It's determined by the students. So when this test was built, several questions were based on this competency, planning. Okay? However, only one perspective is generally correct. So what are you thinking? Back again at your tables. Do you have a preference for either A or B? And do you think your perspective matches the correct answer on the test? So we'll come back as a group, compare your ideas with the test builders. Hey, again, those of you joining us live online, share your thoughts and we're going to include them here in the discussion. And if you're joining us by the Test Camp YouTube channel or on demand, this might be a good time to pause the recording and consider, what do you think is the purpose or the main purpose of planning? Then compare your thoughts to our discussions when you restart the video. Very good. Yeah. All right, some very good, very interesting discussions about this competency and what might be considered correct. Although many of us here have expressed an interest in having students taking charge of their learning, you are correct when you eliminate B. Yep, there's the discussion we had. Eliminate B. Okay? Because it doesn't start from the students in terms of planning. The planning is always top down, starts with the teachers. And we get a little bit more into that, of course, over at the Major FEEPS workshop. Does a professional teacher plan for students to work together, encourage them to be collaborative, or are students expected to apply individual effort and responsibility? So would cooperation best describe a good lesson plan? Students are considered to find solutions together? Or does planning encourage competition, requiring students to work independently? You would put competition in your plan. Now the students might even be ranked among their peers at the end of the competition. There would be a winner. All right, so the correct answer is not individual effort, not individual responsibility, and certainly not competition. All right, is this your experience out there in the schools? Go ahead. It's what you're seeing, but it's not what you believe. Well, how about there in the schools? I mean, most of you are fairly young here. Probably the average age I'm looking around is 20-ish years old or so. No losers. Everybody's a winner. Have you heard that you're being accused of that? Yeah. So, I mean, they would publicly show our grades in class back when I was in school. You don't see that anymore. Well, anyway, let's try another pair. In this plan, you can expect to find the teacher models the concept or the skill for the students. And this is done so the students can be successful, generally on the first attempt. Now this plan, the students work to understand the concept. So the idea is they might fail on their first attempt, and they might even fail on their second attempt. But they will learn from their failure. They'll take pride in their effort because they've overcome. Okay, the first plan is generally associated with what's called direct instruction. That's where the teacher's in charge. The teacher does most of the talking. The second plan is more closely related to indirect instruction, where the student is in charge of their own learning and their achievement. All right, and the correct answer is A. You're saying yes. Well, it's not B. All right, so you're beginning to see a pattern. In this next case, the teacher prepares a lesson plan that provides tips and tricks for learning, like mnemonics, songs, rhymes, or that whole contort your fingers thing they do in math. Have you seen this? Okay, especially for low-level learners, they do this sort of thing, tips and tricks. In B, the students are not given a roadmap to what to do. They figure it out, usually on their own, you know, like in the real world. The idea of Plan A is to ensure student success, again, usually on the first attempt. In Plan B, some failure is likely, especially on the first attempt. All right, any thoughts about the correct answer here? You got it, Plan A. You're doing great. All right, see how I put the correct answer up there at the top to ensure your success? Yeah, I don't want anybody to feel bad here. Okay. All right, one more of these. Plan A. Make a plan that claims to encourage higher level thinking. Or Plan B, I'll read it here, includes heavy doses of memorization or rote learning. Plan A. Lots of references in your plan about high levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Plan B. Emphasis on the fundamentals before moving up the pyramid there. All right, do you recognize the answer that adheres most to current educational culture? All right, so at your tables, you think you know? Talk about this. Before we reveal the best answer, discuss this in your groups. How much memorization and rote learning are you seeing out there in the schools today? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Do you do this? 5 times 18. Okay, what is that? 5 times 18 is 80. It's 5 times 20 minus 2. Minus 20, yeah. So, I mean, 50 plus 30. 100 minus 20. Why do we know that? Because Mrs. Ferguson had me do that when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade. Right, so you seeing that out in the schools today? So what are you seeing about fundamentals, and how's that working out in the schools today? And how are the students encouraged to learn? All right, we'll come back as a group and compare your ideas with the test builders. Hey, those of you joining us today live online, if you'll share your thoughts one more time here, we'll include them up in the discussion. And if you're joining us on demand, this might be another good time to pause the recording and list some of your thoughts about fundamentals and rote learning. So which comes first, fundamentals or higher level thinking? You can compare your thoughts when you restart the video. Good discussions again. All right, which answer would you eliminate? You might think that fundamentals are important. However, on this test, eliminate any answer that hints of memorization. Eliminate any answer that hints of rote learning. Okay, more on that concept during the Major FEEPS workshop. So that's a brief overview of the first FEEP, planning. We'll go a little bit more quickly here through the others. The second FEEP is described this way in the test information guide. We simply call this environment. All right, so what might be considered appropriate or inappropriate when you create a learning environment? Is it going to be fun or should it be rigorous? A teacher who's described by their students as friendly or as challenging? And the best learning environment is not B. Right. How would you like to be perceived? Does that match this test? All right. Let's take a look how an appropriate learning environment might be created and if it matches your perspective. The teacher provides explicit directions so that every student is clear on what's expected on every assignment. Students decide how to best learn and approach each assignment individually. In the first scenario, the teacher is likely to provide directions in written form, on the board, as a handout. In the second scenario, the teacher's role is to direct the students to the resources so they can develop their own learning and own learning skills. Okay, so what do you think here? You are correct, not B. Any ideas why A is the preferred answer? Okay. The teacher's in charge. Okay. So when discussing matters related to student progress, either academic or social, one-on-one is the preferred communication, or do you discuss issues with the whole class? The environment in scenario A suggests that all issues of student progress are to be kept confidential. B recognizes the value of a teachable moment, a discussion about progress that might be beneficial to the whole class. What do you think? Hey, yeah, okay. Keep it confidential. All right, what are you starting to learn about current preferences when you create a student learning environment? Keep them safe. Okay, non-threatening. Next pair. A new student joins your class. Are you expected to assign a buddy or a team? Or introduce the student to the whole class? Maybe even have them tell a little bit about themselves, a little bit about their background. The goal of A is to avoid possible anxiety for the new student. The goal of B is to learn about the student, but to also test their social skills, determine their level of confidence when dealing with a new social situation. All right, is there even any question about this one? Sink or swim does not work, at least not on these tests. And speaking of culture, all cultures are to be shared and celebrated, or cultures are to be studied and compared. The learning environment is to be one of tolerance and acceptance, or diversity brings a new opportunity, a unique opportunity for perspectives to be debated. Eliminate A. No, just kidding. Eliminate B. Yep, kumbaya. All right, let's move on to the third FEAP. What's the state information, the test guide say? Test information guide. Third FEAP. All right, we just call this strategies, teaching strategies. Okay, you'll find that strategies are different than the first FEAP. Remember, that was planning. This is more of the major FEAPs workshop. We'll talk more about this, but this is what the teacher's actually doing. So is the teacher role most closely related to being a leader, leadership, or guidance? All right, are you supposed to support the needs of each learner or promote personal responsibility in your students? Okay, both are good answers, but one's more dominant. Which answer is most correct? Yes. The perspective that most closely aligns with this test is A. Okay, let's try another one. Is it the teacher's role to understand each student individually, or is the preference for them to understand their course content deeply? So is your learning environment learning-centered, or sometimes called student-centered, or is it subject-centered, having a deep understanding of the course content? All right, if you think knowing your students is regarded more highly on this test than deeply understanding your subject, you are correct. In the Major FEAPS workshop, you'll see how this plays out on the sample test questions. Now the next pair, again, is related to the student first or subject first. Do you start with the learner experience, then go to the subject, or do you start with the subject, and then you go to the learning experience? All right, starting with the learner is called constructive or constructivism. Starting with the subject is called didactic. Let's compare the two before you make your decision here. Hang on, we're going to talk about this. So Miss Lorenzen's 6th grade science class, we're going to talk about this at our table. Let's say she's got a marine biology class. Her preferred approach is to either A, go ahead and start with stories, about the students. They've gone camping, they've been to SeaWorld, whatever it is. B, study the mammals first and then plan a field trip. You see the difference between the two? All right, so talk about this in your groups. What are you thinking? Do you have a preference for either A or B? And what would be the correct answer on a test like this? We'll come back as a group and compare your ideas. Hey again, those of you joining us today live online, thanks again for sharing your thoughts. It's been very helpful during our discussions. And if you're joining us on demand, this might be a good time to pause the recording and list some of your thoughts about your approach, your preferred teaching strategies. Then you compare your thoughts when you restart the video. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, we're back. Everyone here, if you're over 30 years old, you'd like to remember that we used to go on a lot of field trips, right? It was fundamentals first, then go out in the world. Not anymore, okay? So we start now with the students' experiences and work back towards the content. All right, now here's an interesting pair. What's going on here? The strategies for giving rewards is student-centered or... Oh, I see. Okay, so we either give them specific praise or general praise here. General, okay. This is considered behaviorism, kind of a rewards and punishment. Are you seeing that going on out there? These token economies going on out in the schools? And humanism. Yes, go ahead. A question back here. What is token economy? Can somebody explain that? Go ahead and explain that, and then I'll repeat it for those listening to the video. Yes, that's what I understand it to be too. Token mean, like money. You got tokens. There's an economy that goes on in these classrooms. Every time you do something right, you get rewarded. Very seldom, but you might get punished. They'll take away something. So it's all behaviorism, right? The students aren't getting, they're doing everything for extrinsic reward. Why did the teachers do that? It works. Yeah, it's not helping the students get any better or take any personal responsibility, but it is working. So in this case, anyway, we're going to cross out A. What you're going to do is encourage students to think for themselves, right? Oh, no, I'm just kidding. No, we're not doing that. The better choice on this test is A. It's up to the teacher, the adult in charge. They are supposed to let the student know if the student's on the correct path or not. Students do not think for themselves. Okay, so the 4th FEAP is described in the test information guide as knowledge of various types, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read that. We just call this assessment. There you go. All right, so let's see here. Starting here, students are supposed to come up with the correct answers, or what's more important, they come up with the correct or maybe some new ideas. So what's the purpose of assessment? To determine if the students meet the goals and objectives, or can there be some focus on creativity? Okay, again, let's not get too cynical here. Let's back up here for a minute. Let's just say you were supposed to drive someone across town, someone elderly, you're supposed to drive them across town. What's more important, to get them there safely or to get them there on time? Right, they're both important, but you see how you would probably lean towards safety. Okay, that's what's going on here. The people here today who are writing these tests, they lean one way or another. So in this case, they lean towards the goals and objectives. You're going to be working in a government school. There's objectives, so you have to meet those. And goals and objectives are king and queen. Now, you're currently in a college education program, right? How many? Do you mind? So almost everybody. Is most of the assessment, and you teachers here too, is most of the assessment of your progress based on test scores? Or on your ideas? Yeah, that's how you're graded too. So this whole talk about being creative and all this, unless you're going to give a grade for it, yeah, it might not be any wonder why the goals and objectives are kind of the tail wagging the dog here. Well, that was an awful lot of opinion there, wasn't it? All right, so how are you expected to measure student progress? Against a set of given standards, or do you compare the students to each other? maybe like against a grade level or something. That first one up there is called criterion referenced. You've heard of this? Criterion based. The assessment is compared to a certain criterion, a certain standard or benchmark. Comparing to peers is called norm referenced. You've heard of that? Now you're comparing to a sample group. You might assume the group kind of the same age level, for example, that sort of thing. Now, but again, both answers are appropriate, but in most cases, goals and objectives drive both teaching and learning, so expect A to be the most appropriate type of answer. We'll discuss this in more detail in the workshop this afternoon. All right, do you know this term? What is the term for this type of assessment? Okay, and how about this type? Do you think you know them? All right, you said the first one you said formative, second one is summative. Both appropriate depending on the situation. However, be aware there's currently an emphasis on keeping daily or at least weekly records. So this means that you're more likely to encounter test questions related to formative assessment. But in either case, if you don't know these terms, you need to get familiar with them. As you monitor student progress, would you be expected to focus on the errors the students make or the ideas that they generate? Is the emphasis on being diagnostic, comparing the student's condition against a set of standards, are they meeting the standards, or synoptic? Simply you take the occasional snapshot to see how the students are doing. No real reference to where they should be at this level, for example. All right, so you might think of this, let's take a moment and talk this through. This is pretty important here. Maybe think of this as the teacher as a doctor. When you go to the doctor, diagnostic assessment, usually you're there because there's a problem. So something's wrong that needs to be fixed. Synoptic, that really isn't assuming anything. That's like getting your yearly physical. You get a report that provides a picture of your current condition. So see the difference between the two? This first one is, this first one demands attention now, something to be fixed. So if you're a public school teacher, just like the doctor, what's your role? It's that up there at the top. Right, this is the way that we think about teaching today. Again, we'll look more closely at this competency in the Major FEEPS workshop. Okay, so that was a brief introduction of the Major FEEPS. Let's look at see if we can get them all here, and I'll give you a little bit, show you how many are on the test. Planning, there's 18 questions out of how many? 100, right? Second FEEP, you remember, is environment. Okay, 15 questions. Third FEEP, teaching strategies, okay? All right, this competency generally deals, remember, it's not planning, it's on your feet, in the moment issues, okay? I expect about 14 questions here, so we're pretty much evenly distributed here, right? Okay, this is a good time for you to share your thoughts about the Major FEEPS. Let's go ahead and take a break here so you get away from my voice. Now that you previewed the 4 competencies, you likely have an idea about your stronger areas, right? That sort of thing. Okay, so how do you prepare for a test like this? Do you work on your easy questions first? How do you do that? Or do you go to the other sections first? So anyway, talk about that for just a little bit. What's any questions you have about the Major FEEPS? We're only going to take a couple minutes, and then we'll come back as a group. Hey, if you're joining us today live online by the test camp, put your ideas up here. We'll include them in the discussion. And for those of you joining us on demand, you might want to take a break here too now. Think about how you prepare for a test like this and restart that video when you're ready to rejoin us. Okay, so welcome back. If you participate in the other workshops, you likely remember there's no best approach. It's kind of a personal, it's up to you. But I want to make sure there's no other questions about these. We got an overview pretty good. All right, we'll see you in the next workshop if you want to know about the Major FEEPS. This next section we're going to go through here is called the Minor FEEPS. We won't spend as much time because they're only 1/3 of the test. All right, so here we go. We're going to begin down here with what used to be called ESOL. It's now called ELL. So if you're actually putting these in order, we're going to start with number 7 down here. Okay, and you can expect there's only about 7 questions related to this one. Another area then is literacy. This used to be called reading. Only 7 questions here also. We're going now to two competencies are missing: law and ethics, going to be about 9 questions. This is what's related to the code of professional conduct. And then 12 questions are related to knowledge of professional improvement, professionalism. All right, so let's look at some scenarios related to these, starting with, what do you think this is? Yes, professionalism. Good. All right, so what about this? What about being a professional? In terms of student conduct, how is student conduct best monitored by a teacher? A professional teacher in this state, on this test, would the teacher monitor and record student attitudes daily, or include student conduct as part of course grades? So are you doing this ongoing, or are you doing it in the teacher's grade book, maybe at the end of the semester? Correct. Student conduct and student achievement are considered separate issues. All right, and again, there's that whole issue of doing something now. You can't wait. Remember the whole doctor analogy? What if a new teacher needs curriculum assistance? You have a question about what to teach. Is the professional move to ask somebody in the school, like other teachers or your department chair, or are you supposed to learn for yourself by studying, maybe go back to school, learn a little bit more like this? So do you lean on your local community or the research community? All right, well, the answer here is A, but maybe not for the reason you think. Remember, it goes back to that issue of urgency. Remember the diagnosis analogy earlier? The assumption is that something needs to be done now, so there's no time to go consult research or take a class or anything like that. All right, more on this when we get to the minor FEEPS workshop later this afternoon. This next pairing is related to the professional teacher seeking instructional assistance. I'll look at your current practice first and then try to make improvements, or lean on your peers, your local community of professionals. So is the starting point reflective practice, starting by monitoring your own behavior and making your own improvements, or is the starting point professional consultation, seeking advice of professionals in your building? Any ideas on this one? Look to yourself first, and you might remember, for those of you in teaching education classes, this is called reflective practice. If you don't know about that term, get to know it. Reflective practice. All right, another one of these. How do you monitor your improvement as a teacher in general? All right, do you look at your teacher grade book? Maybe get an overview of how well your students are doing? Or do you rely on individual test results? So for improvement in general, do you stand back and kind of take a summative view and check and see how you're doing? Or do you measure your overall performance day to day to day? Now let me give you a hint on this. This might be a little deceiving. Think about it this way. If you wanted an overall view of your health, I don't know, say body weight, is it a good idea to get on the scales every day? Okay, so there is a danger maybe of looking too much day to day to day, but you do want to have reflective practice. All right, so let's look at one more scenario for this competency, which is parent involvement. Is it preferred, at least on this test, for you to contact parents through the students or make contact directly with the parents? The first strategy suggests that students know the culture of their own household, so they make the best couriers of information back and forth. The second strategy suggests that your contact directly with parents is the most effective and efficient way to start open communication. So which way are you going here? All right, well, the preferred answer is not B. The old triad of teacher, parent, student, that whole triad's evolved over time now. And so we'll talk more in detail about that in the minor FEEPS workshop. Moving on to the next competency. All right, we call this just simply law and ethics. So in the case of a student injury or even a perceived student injury, do you inform local government officials who are outside the school, or do you inform your school administration? So in scenario A, you might, for example, contact the Department of Children and Families here in Florida, or in B, inform the appropriate colleague at your school. All right, who thinks you know the answer to this? Somebody? Okay, right way back here. Go ahead. I'll repeat for up here that people are watching the video. Yes, the answer is A. Isn't that a little bit surprising? It was to me at first, but now I know after years of studying this. It depends. See, it's the situation that's going on in the schools today with, not the traditional mom and dad sort of thing. You never know what's going on. So again, safety, student safety is always paramount here. Let's do a couple other situations. Think about law and ethics in terms of your use of technology. Are you bound to follow the licensure agreements that were made by the district or the school, or do you consult a local personnel when you have a question about or an issue about how to use technologies? Are you supposed to understand the law, the agreements that were made, or do you just look into district policy? And the correct answer is know the law. Yeah, that's including the software. So you can consult your local personnel to find the resources, to learn about what they agreed to. And then what about email? What are some of the hazards of using email, particularly in public schools? Is it potential viruses, or is the legal and ethical concern related to non-academic or fraudulent information? So more specifically, is the main concern doing some harm to the system or harm to yourself or to other users? Well, your first responsibility is to the district, so you're supposed to protect the system. All right, we talk about that more in the other workshops. Here is the 8th, I believe, and final FEEP. Oh, nope, there are going to be 2 more. Okay, this is called English Language Learners. Let's take a look at a couple scenarios related to this competency. All right, when do you practice? When do you give the students time to practice their language skills? Low risk situations, so they're likely to succeed, or do you put them with a language buddy? That way they got one-on-one practice. So it's the teacher's role to make sure that they avoid embarrassment for the student or increase the student's confidence. Okay, you've got this now, right? Avoid embarrassment. And this is consistent with our discussion about the second FEEP, that learning environment FEEP, right? Now we're on the 8th and final FEEP. This is what it says in the test information guide. See the key word there? Right, literacy. Used to be called reading, but it's more than that. It's communication, literacy. Okay, for a brief overview of this competency, here's some statements. The teacher is expected to, there's A, and here's statement B. Okay, statement A, students' interests are mentioned, as is the teacher's role. Okay, they're a guide. Yeah, I went ahead and changed that there, didn't we? Okay, and then in statement B, the teacher believes in the student's power of reasoning, and they want them to exercise. They encourage them to exercise their thinking skills. So if you said A for this one, you're matching the test. Very good. All right, competencies are put into 2 groups. The first group is the major FEEPs, like we talked about. And one of the first of those 4 then was planning. The second one was learning environment. What'd you get for the third one again? Okay, strategies. Okay, 18 of those again, like we said. And then you have to test the students, right? What we call assessment. So you set up your room, you teach, you test. That's 65 of the 100 questions, the major FEEPs. We just finished talking about the minor FEEPs, and so here they are again. They make up 1/3 of the test. And again, 71%. That's what's going to be required on this test. So we say over there in the training center, go find your 71. And here is how 71 equates to each competency. So you can see this is not an A-B test. This is pass-fail. And you'll have plenty of time to practice these over in the training center. All right, during the other 2 workshops, major and minor FEEPs, we're also going to discuss how to get the most reliable and inexpensive study resources. So complete the training activities here at the test camp, and you can expect to perform with confidence. If you joined us here today online, answer the question on your screen. You can begin training with us or come over to the other workshop. There's no better time than now to empower your test confidence.